Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 90th meeting of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Review Committee. My name is Melanie O'Brien, and I am the designated federal official to the Review Committee. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. The recording, transcripts, and meeting minutes will be made publicly available after this meeting and will include the names of those in attendance during today's call. If you object to this, you may disconnect at this time. This is a public meeting of a federal advisory committee established by the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, of 1990, and this meeting is held under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA, and its implementing regulations. This meeting was noticed in the Federal Register on May 27, 2025. An agenda for this meeting and materials were posted to the National NAGPRA Programs events page. The Secretary of the Interior issued a charter for this review committee, which governs its objectives and scope of activities. The purpose of the review committee is to monitor and review the inventory and identification process for repatriation activities under Sections 5, 6, and 7 of the Act. The review committee is also responsible for reporting to Congress on the progress and any barriers encountered in carrying out its responsibilities. FACA requires the advisory committees that their membership be fairly balanced in terms of points of view represented and functions to be performed. To achieve this, NAGPRA requires that the review committee be comprised of 7 members. 3 members nominated by Indian tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations, and traditional Native American religious leaders, with at least 2 such persons being traditional Indian religious leaders. 3 members are nominated by national museum organizations and scientific organizations, and 1 member is appointed from a list of persons developed and consented to by all the other members. Members are appointed by the Secretary of the Interior and serve as advisors to the Secretary on NAGPRA-related issues. There is currently 1 vacancy on the committee following the end of the 2-year term of Armand Menthorn. We solicited nominations twice in 2024, and in February 2025, we received nominations which were forwarded to the Secretary of the Interior for appointment. To date, the Secretary has not made an appointment from these nominations. There is no quorum requirement for this committee. Despite having fewer than 7 members appointed, I have determined that this meeting can proceed. And with that as an introduction, I'd like to start with a roll call of the committee members. So if you could please answer out loud when I call your name. Holly Aloha Ayau.
Aloha.
Michael Ketchum.
Present.
Dominique de Beaubien.
Present.
Angela Garcia Lewis.
Present.
Toby Patrick. Monica Shaw.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Patrick informed me that he would not be able to make today's meeting, so we will proceed without him. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the individuals who are assisting me with this meeting. We have 1 attorney from the Department of the Interior Office of the Solicitor, Ilana Oser, with the Division of Indian Affairs. And from the National NAGPRA Program, Lisa Koszalski is the Review Committee Coordinator who is responsible for organizing this meeting and preparing minutes and transcripts of these proceedings. With that as introduction, I will call this meeting to order. Mr. Chair, before we begin our agenda for today, would you like to offer a traditional opening?
I would. mai luna mai ona mea huna no eo ona mele e homa e homai e homai e oh mai kai ke mai luna mai ona mea una no eo ona mele e oh mai e oh mai e oh mai Au makua mai kala hiki a kala kau, mai ka okui a ka halawai. Au makua ia krahina kua, ia krahina alo ia ka a kau I kalani. O ki ha I kalani, o bue I kalani, no nulu I kalani, ka holo I kalani. E ia ka pula pula o ko National NAGPRA Review Committee. E mālama o ko ia mako. E ulu I kalani, e ulu I ka honua, e ulu I ka pai aina o Hawaii, e ho mai ka ike, e ho mai ka ikaika. E ho mai ki aka mai, e ho mai ka ike pāpā lua, e ho mai ka mana. Mahalo.
Thank you very much. Before we begin our first agenda item today, I would like to note that the review committee is very interested in receiving comments from anyone in attendance on the progress made and barriers encountered in implementing NAGPRA. If you're interested in providing a public comment during this meeting, please let me know when I ask for public comment. At that time, I will turn on the chat feature for this meeting, or you can raise your hand to request a time to make public comment. Prior to scheduling this meeting, we received one request for a presentation to the review committee from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, or GAO. The GAO has requested time on the agenda to present to the committee, as well as time for the committee to provide feedback on a list of questions provided in the meeting materials. Following the committee's discussion, the GAO also asked for time for public comment on those same questions. As a result, we have scheduled a longer time than usual for this presentation. If you will give me a minute to bring in the presenters, and I will turn this over to Tammy Conquest with the GAO.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Tammy Conquest, and I'm an assistant director at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, and I help manage our tribal and Native American issues portfolio. Joining me today are my team members, and I'm not sure if they are up yet or not, but I was going to let them introduce themselves, but I'll go ahead and introduce them. With me today is Michelle Wong. Michelle is our analyst in charge on the engagement. We also have Travis Cady. He is our senior analyst. And we also have Jeanette Suarez, who is our attorney on the engagement. Thanks to the NAGPRA Review Committee for allowing us to present and discuss our work in this meeting. We look forward to hearing your perspectives on the progress and challenges with implementing NAGPRA since our last work. Today, I will give you a brief overview of GAO and our prior NAGPRA work. As some of you know, GAO is an independent, nonpartisan legislative branch federal agency that provides Congress, the executive branch agencies, and the public with information about how to improve federal programs and services. GAO conducts most of its reviews and audits in response to mandates in the law and requests from Congress. Through its work, GAO may issue recommendations to federal agencies and Congress. It is important to note that GAO does not audit tribes or tribal organization activities, but values their perspectives. As some of you are aware, GAO has previously reported on federal actions related to the protection and repatriation of Native American human remains and other cultural items. And during the 30+ years since NAGPRA was passed, GAO has issued about 6 reports, including our 2010 Comprehensive Review of Federal Agencies' Implementation of NAGPRA. GAO has made over 50 recommendations, and most of them have been closed as implemented. However, we recognize more work is needed. Earlier this year, at the request of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs, House Committee on Natural Resources, and Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, we started a comprehensive review of NAGPRA, and I will turn it over to Michelle to provide more information about that engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy, and greetings to the committee and members of the public. My name is Michelle Wong, and I'm a senior analyst leading this review looking at NAGPRA implementation. We received a broad request to examine NAGPRA implementation, and to fully address the scope of this request, GAO decided that we will complete this work in phases. This first review that I'm about to go over will examine implementation of the requirements of NAGPRA's collections provisions since 2010, when we last conducted our comprehensive review of NAGPRA, as well as Subpart C of the 2023 revised NAGPRA regulations. The 2010 report examined federal agencies' implementation of NAGPRA, but in this review, we plan to examine both federal agencies and museums' implementation of NAGPRA. We do have some preliminary objectives for this work, and they are subject to change as we progress through the work. But right now, we have objectives to examine to what extent have selected federal agencies and museums implemented NAGPRA and its regulations for repatriating collections of human remains and cultural items, and what challenges, if any, have they faced doing so. Our second area to examine are what actions has the National NAGPRA program taken to improve federal agencies and museums' implementation of NAGPRA and its regulations for repatriating collections of human remains and cultural items. And the third area is what promising practices, if any, could improve the repatriation of human remains and cultural items. As part of this review, we plan to consider the perspectives of federal agency officials, museum representatives, associations and organizations with members involved in the NAGPRA process, and tribes. In terms of the type of evidence we hope to consider for this work, we will review documents and reports, analyze federal agency data, gather testimonial statements, and conduct site visits. We are currently in the design phase of our review and have thus far met with federal agencies, including National NAGPRA, and different associations and organizations with members that include museums and other NAGPRA practitioners. So we very much appreciate the opportunity to discuss this work today with the NAGPRA Review Committee, and we're happy to take questions and comments as they relate to this work, and in particular, very interested in hearing your perspectives on the topics that we shared prior to this meeting that I see has been dropped into the webinar chat. Just so I can go over the areas of particular interest to us at this time, we're interested in discussing the extent to which federal agencies have made progress on recommendations from the Review Committee's 2024 report related to NAGPRA's collections provisions. Also, any effects the revised NAGPRA regulations have had on federal agencies and museums' implementation of NAGPRA. Any challenges that federal agencies and museums face implementing NAGPRA and its revised regulations, and if applicable, any effects of these challenges. And then finally, we do wish to hear about any promising practices that could improve federal agencies and museums' implementation of NAGPRA and its revised regulations, or improve repatriation more broadly. So at this time, if NAGPRA Review Committee members or other would have any questions or comments related to this work, we are looking forward to questions and discussion.
I have no questions. Please proceed.
Regarding the discussion topics that we shared prior to the meeting, does anyone have any comments or thoughts they wish to share related to the extent to which federal agencies have made progress on the review committee's recommendations?
I do have one question. Well, first, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time today. Can you talk a little bit about the methodologies that you'll be using to assess progress for federal agencies and museums?
Sure. We will be reviewing some data that we have received from the National NAGPRA Program Office. We'll also be conducting interviews with different federal agencies that have reported NAGPRA collections, in addition to reaching out to museums who have also reported collections subject to NAGPRA. So we'll be gathering information in the form of data and testimonial statements, and complementing that with different reports produced in the past by GAO or other organizations, including the NAGPRA Review Committee.
In the acquisition of that information, did agencies identify a financial need as, I mean, where was that in terms of their explaining where they were at in terms of compliance? How important was that?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So you're asking the extent to which federal agencies may have discussed the financial resources for implementing NAGPRA?
Available to them that was impacting their ability to comply?
So we are earlier in our work. We're in the design phase. So we're just right now trying to design how we will collect our evidence. We've not yet moved squarely into the evidence gathering phase. But it is very typical of GAO to ask federal agencies and other entities about different factors that may contribute to impacts of this work. So it could be information about budget, available resources, staff capacity, things of that nature.
Did any of the agencies report not receiving our 2024 report to Congress?
We've not discussed that explicitly with them about your committee's report.
Okay.
Hi, this is Monica. I had a question about, you mentioned tribes as also being one of the sort of groups that you will be contacting, but you didn't mention them in the sort of gathering phase. So if you could explain the difference between the different times when you do mention whether you're gathering information from federally recognized tribes or communities, and when you're focusing on museums and federal agencies and their perspectives.
Certainly. We do plan to conduct some site visits around the country, as to go visit different repositories, talk to officials and museum representatives. And we also will reach out to different tribes in that area to see if they would be interested in sharing their perspectives when we're there. We've also tried to conduct some outreach to folks to let folks know this engagement is happening, that we are conducting this review. And if different tribes want to contact us to share perspectives, we welcome the opportunity to do so. So we have reached out through NAGPRA to contact, for example, tribal leaders or California TIPOs, since we may be going out into that area to, meet with them when we're there. But that's an example of how, we'll integrate the perspectives of tribes in our work.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we've also included our contact information of the team in the materials distributed before the meeting. So in the event other individuals want to contact us to share perspectives in their different capacities, we welcome that as well.
Are you able to share yet which federal agencies and which museums you'll be incorporating into this?
Not at this time. We're still designing our work. We will for the most part, be reaching out to agencies that were also in our 2010 report, because we want to interact with agencies that have reported NAGPRA collections and have historically engaged the NAGPRA process. But we've not yet finalized our design.
Will you be incorporating any sort of public comment or recommendation on museums that, tribes or other people would want to see included as part of this evaluation?
That's one of the reasons why we want to gather the perspective of so many different entities involved in the NAGPRA process. If at any time folks, wish to share a perspective that we can consider while we do our work, we can definitely take that into consideration as we continue the audit. Our team has been curious, though, if there were thoughts about, from your perspective as the committee, thoughts on progress of implementation of the collections provisions, either specific to recommendations you've made in your reports or more broadly.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again, please?
Sure, we were interested in any thoughts that you may wish to share at this time related to implementation of the collections provisions. And these can be thoughts related specifically to recommendations that the committee has made in their reports, or any higher level thoughts, broader thoughts.
Well, I think one of the thoughts that comes to mind immediately for me is because with the implementation of the new regulations, the updated regulations, we've seen an uptick in museums contacting us and wanting to comply, which is, of course, a positive thing. The problem is they just ignore the fact that they haven't complied for the last 35 years. And in one case, because we wanted to move the repatriation along, we did. But at the same time, we had submitted to National NAGPRA an allegation of failure to comply. And then the assistant secretary made a decision, found that it was a situation where there was failure to comply, but then didn't recommend a fine or any other civil penalty because of the expeditious manner in which we had conducted the consultation on repatriation. And so now, when these situations come up, it's almost a catch-22, because if you proceed to expeditiously repatriate, which is what we're supposed to be doing, you run a fear that then the agency is going to say, okay, well, museum, we just slap you on the wrist for waiting 3.5 decades and making our ancestors wait 3.5 decades, but you can go, no civil penalty for you. And so I just put that out there because, it's like, what do we do now that we have the effect that we want of museums complying? Do we just ignore that they've missed all the federal deadlines prior to that? Or do we wait till that issue gets resolved before we engage in repatriation, thereby participating ourselves in the delay of the return of our ancestors? So it's a conundrum, and we're struggling with, because our role is to provide care and protection, and that means if we know they're there, to do all that we can to get them home. But then there's the non-compliance. So I don't know if you guys had thoughts on, or have seen examples of that and had advice for us and how to approach it.
Thank you for sharing that. We can certainly have that in mind as we're following up on our line of questioning with different entities. And you noted that this was made particularly apparent in light of the revised regulations. Is there any aspect of the revised regulations that you think was a key contributing factor to that, or just with a new deadline, folks were coming out of the woodwork to contact you all?
I don't know if I can put my finger on one specific part, but I think the fact that the regs were updated and like, I think the one that caught everybody's attention was displays, consent to display. I think for sure that got a lot of museums' attentions, and as a result, maybe kickstarted their compliance with the notice and consultation requirements. That's been my limited experience in the last 2.5 years. It's that was probably the leading one.
Thank you. Do you think there is there is potential for a promising practice that could help address the conundrum that you described?
Well, I think that's been happening already with the National NAGPRA program. Melanie's been doing a lot of training, and a lot of museums have been participating in them and getting up to date with the changes to the regs. And as a result, Melanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but there must have been an uptick in Federal Register notice publications as a result. We're hearing from museums we never heard of in 35 years. So it's, it's having the intended effect. We just asking the question, do you just ignore the last 35 years?
Previous professionals. And so maybe looking at some of the university programs that are training museum professionals. And I think Melanie, and through the National NAGPRA program, has reached a whole new generation of people that is helping move the new regulations forward and is helping. I mean, maybe I'm a little optimistic, but I think it's progressing in ways that may not have been seen since 2010, since the last audit. But I think looking at promising practices at universities who are training young people to ask those questions when they enter into the workforce is probably a good place to look. A slightly different question I had for you all is the timeline of if the different phases. If you could just reiterate that. I'm a new member and I'm unsure. I couldn't find it in the documents provided. When is the design phase set to close, and the next phase set to start?
Sure, thank you for the question. We're hoping to confirm our design by the end of July, after which we will move more squarely into the evidence gathering and evidence collection phase.
Just want to add there that in terms of issuing a report, it will probably be next year before a report will be issued publicly regarding this review.
So the GAO has our 2024 report to Congress.
Yes, we do.
As part of the approach that you've laid out, will the 4 things that the committee asked for be pursued? I believe that was excavations and discoveries, grants, civil penalties, and the costs of the new regs. It sounds like those are going to be part of the scope of what you do, or is it just collection practices?
We'll be conducting this work in phases. This first phase will examine the collections provisions, and then in terms of civil enforcement and other aspects of the broader request that we received from Congress. We think we can more sufficiently address that with more narrowly scoped projects. That doesn't mean that we won't cover some of this during our examination of the collections provisions.
I'm sorry, you did say that the GAO has a copy of our 2020.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Because part of what we're going to talk about today is our work to organize to draft our 2025 report, which we'll make sure GAO gets as well.
I've got another barrier I'd like to bring to your attention. And this may be suited to one of the later phases of your investigation, but it has to do with some of the other members have mentioned is that we are seeing this massive influx of compliance efforts, but we still really struggle with finding reburial land. And so one of the recommendations in FY24 report was to have federal agencies that are landholders allow reburials on federal lands. And some do allow it and some don't, but the Park Service is still one of the agencies that does not allow reburial on their lands. So I think that would be a really strong recommendation coming from the GAO to kind of take a look at what these different landholders are doing and their reburial provisions.
Thank you for that comment. Are there, in terms of potential promising practices or models that you think are going in the right direction or doing things in a more satisfactory way from your perspective? Do you have any examples that you might want to share with us today?
Absolutely. I'd say the Forest Service, at least in my experience, they've always been able to accommodate reburials within their lands. And so if we could mimic those types of policies across the different federal landholders, I think that would be really beneficial.
Thank you.
Michelle, are you seeing the chat questions? Because I think Angela Neller is asking really good questions. How will they identify federal agencies that hold collections, but no one knows that? Very critical question.
Yes.
If they're not reporting, you're not going to know.
Right. I mean, we are looking at federal agencies that have reported NAGPRA collections. And so, as we're thinking about designing the scope of our work, if there are ideas or thoughts about how to identify collections that are not reported or known in that way, we are very open to considering that as we design our work. But right now, we're looking at those that have reported NAGPRA collections to National NAGPRA.
And maybe someone can update me. What's the role of the U.S. Department of Defense in NAGPRA? Are they still not required to disclose collections? Or are they required to disclose collections? Because the cases I've done with them were only because they had partnered with a museum.
We certainly have a lot of collections that have been reported by Department of Defense branches.
What, like a fourth of them, half of them?
I would have to, all the big ones. The Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, the Army. The Army Corps is technically a part of the Department of Defense. I believe even the Coast Guard has reported, but that, of course, is Homeland Security. See, this is why I need a list in front of me, but certainly most, if not all, of the Department of Defense branches, including many of the National Guard branches, have reported NAGPRA collections.
Interesting. That's good to know. And hopefully that information will be available to GAO as it goes through its process.
Yes, any collections reported to National NAGPRA, we're aware of those. And then thank you for calling my attention to the chat. I see one other question is that, or comment. One significant challenge I see with implementing the new regulations is the difficulty agencies are showing inappropriately deferring to traditional knowledge when identifying cultural items. The team would be interested in hearing any elaboration or examples that could help illustrate that comment so we can consider that in our work. I'm not sure if anyone else has the ability to comment on that.
Yes, so individuals in the public are welcome to raise their hand or to put comments in the chat. And if you would like to respond verbally, the person who made the comment can let me know that in the chat or raise their hand. Or the committee can respond to the question of deference to tribal knowledge.
Well, if I may, I can just speak in the Hawaiian experience. So, for example, the mele that I offered and the pule that I offered, eho mai is I was asking for insight. Eho mai means to grant, and I was saying grant me understanding, grant me insights that I wouldn't otherwise have. Grant me the knowledge that I held in chance in other forms of history keeping or knowledge. But what that does is it recognizes that you can ask for these types of knowledge from your ancestors who've already gone on. You can, and we've used these examples in many cases to help meet the culture affiliation standard, to say to a museum, actually, you have additional remains that are missing in your collection. You just haven't found them yet. We call that hiding in plain sight, because of usually it's because of identification number, mistakes. But just knowing that a museum that you're dealing with has other ancestors and has other cultural objects that may be subject to NAGPRA, even though it's not disclosed on the. Because if anything we've learned in the last 35 years, especially from the top tier museums in the country, is that they have no idea how much they actually have because they just have so much. And they're not intentionally trying to hide these things from you. They just don't know. And so one practice that we want to encourage museums to constantly do is constantly recheck their inventories, especially general ones that they haven't, gone through more specifically to make sure that they do not, hold on to or in possession of NAGPRA cultural items. But for us, sometimes it's hard for museums to take the practice of ike papalua, the practice of communicating with your kupuna, to take them seriously. So we kind of one-upped that by one of our friends just got her PhD in the practice of ike papalua. That's Auli'i Hirahara. And in the case when we're dealing with the Germans, there wasn't sufficient evidence to identify the remains as being Hawaiian. And her team did their presentation, shared their findings, and the German physical anthropologists remarked that none of their findings were inconsistent with the physical evidence, and therefore was accepted and appended to the report. And then those remains had been deemed to meet the identification standard and were returned to us as Hawaiian. The problem was they were fragmented, and that's why the physical anthropologists had a hard time identifying them. But just an example that you can, just because it's not Western science and is being characterized as a cultural practice doesn't mean it's not cultural science. and we're the world's first cultural scientists as Aboriginal people, because we had to be in order to survive. And so those are examples where when there's blanks, we use ceremony and prayer to fill in those blanks.
Thank you for that explanation. So it sounds like by incorporating more traditional knowledge, more connections could be made. It could facilitate the repatriation process, and without doing so, it could really stifle or delay progress on that front.
Yes, and it gives the museum decision maker one more tool to work with in their analysis of cultural affiliation. So other members?
I see a couple of questions in the chat that seem geared more towards the committee, but please let me know if I am misreading them.
With the recent signing of the Oh, that's a great question. What efforts can be or will be made to advocate for data management systems to protect our native nations' traditional knowledge from further exploitation? I think that's a great concern to raise, and something that should be incorporated into the GAO's process when they look into these systems on how agencies are, or what agencies are doing to protect them. Melanie, under the regs, how does that work?
Yeah, so we received a lot of comments in revising the regulations related to the protection of sensitive information in particular. And we have a lengthy response in the final rule related to that. Overall, our goal with the revised regulations is to clarify that sensitive information is not required as a part of the NAGPRA process. And as always, since 1995, the National NAGPRA program and the regulations have encouraged museums and federal agencies to not write sensitive information down in the first place as a means of protecting it. We further advise in the revised regulations that tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations should request that information that's sensitive and being shared orally not be recorded or written down in any format, and that is acceptable under the regulations, that information should be protected in that way. Unfortunately, NAGPRA does not provide any additional protections for information that is written down or is provided to the federal government. So that is the risk, as in providing that information to the federal government exposes it, as NAGPRA does not have any protections.
And Melanie, I believe that last question might actually relate to your office.
Yeah, the question about federal collections, I think, relates to something that I'll be touching on in my program report in the next agenda item. But certainly the recent requirement for museums to report on federal collections has resulted in additional data on this question of federal collections that may not be known.
Do any committee members have comments about that they wish to share with the GAO team during this time.
I'm sorry, Michelle, could you repeat that?
Oh, sure. With the museum's requirement to report federal collections or collections that are potential NAGPRA collections of federal agencies, does any committee member have a comment they wish to share with GAO about that topic in particular?
I know I'm starting to see an uptick in communication between federal agencies and museums that have that cross-sharing of collections, but I don't think there's been enough time for us to evaluate if it's effective or not, if it's making a difference, or if we're catching all of those collections that are out there.
Yes, we recognize that we've started this job at the same time that a lot of folks are adapting to the new to the revised regulations and the different deadlines. So, but we will be conducting this work through the end of the year, as Tammy mentioned. So, if at any time there are examples you wish to share or comments you wish to make, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is in the materials provided.
So I just wanted to kind of circle back real quick. You know, we acknowledge that the GAO does have the committee's 2024 report. That report included committee's 4 main recommendations, or 4 requests rather: excavations and discoveries 1, grants 2, civil penalties 3, costs of new regs 4. And I just want to say to the rest of the committee members that I think the 4 recommendations should also stay in the 2025 report, so that when in preparing it, it sounds like we should keep them in place. So let's just keep that in the back of our heads. To Michelle, when can we expect GAO to initiate studies on excavations, grants, civil penalties? Like, what's your guys' timing?
We think that's more appropriate to be scoped into a different project. I don't have an estimated time frame on when we may begin that work.
And when that work does is undertaken, will GAO be gathering costs involved in those efforts so that we can better understand what this is costing?
Yes, that can certainly be a question that we ask of the entities that we interview and work with on that report. And I see Tammy has a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the understanding in terms of kind of like how our work gets started. As I mentioned, we work at the request of Congress. Our work is basically coming from mandates or specific request letters from Congress. And so we are aware of the reports that the National NAGPRA Review Committee does issue to Congress. And it's pretty much up to Congress to request that work be done in a letter to us. That's how the process works there. Just wanted to clarify that to manage expectations.
Did Congress limit the scope of this first report to what's being included now, or would it be possible to include the committee's previous recommendations?
Yeah, we received a pretty comprehensive request letter from House Natural Resources. And the way our process works is we get the request letter from them. And as Michelle indicated, we are currently in the design phase. That's where we look at the request letter, make a determination on what we think is feasible to do, given our resources and information that's going to be available. And we then report back to the requesting committee to let them know, here's what we think we can do for you for this particular time. And then anything that it's not included in that first review, then we'll go through another process of working with them to add on in future jobs any additional information that we didn't cover in the first review.
I want to be mindful of the time that you graciously allotted us. There is one more comment in the chat that I just wanted to summarize so that it can be here for the record. Someone mentioned that one example in Northern California is that there is a tribe on the border with Oregon, and despite known ethnographic data on intervillage marriages in the Pacific Northwest, we still have an uphill battle with many museums. One of our council members is starting to work with tribal members on genealogy charts to record Oregon village names to try to remedy this, but that museums are unaware of anthropology 101 concepts and even challenge tribes on their recorded histories, and that can be frustrating and cause unnecessary delays. Yes, I can definitely see how that could be a challenge, and I encourage you to reach out to us if you'd like to elaborate further on that, or if there are any promising practices or changes that you think could help address that concern and challenge.
Members, any more questions for the good folks from GAO? If there's nothing more, Michelle and Tammy and Jeanette, I wanted to thank on behalf of the committee and everyone who is in the village, the NAGPRA village of implementation, to thank you for the presentation and the efforts that are being undertaken, because the information that we receive can only help us make better decisions by better understanding the landscape and how we can, implement what the original framers like Walter Echohawk and Jack Trope and Dan Monroe and all those others wanted to see happen with this law, and how far it's come for 30 years, but just how much farther it still has to go. And to keep that in mind, that this is what do you call that? What do you call those long races? This is not a sprint, it's a
Marathon.
Yeah.
Marathon.
This is a marathon. So remember, during the marathon, hydrate, keep your eye on the prize. Never forget where the end line is, where the finish line is, and just keep going, and be supportive of each other as best as we can.
Thank you for those well wishes. We certainly hope that our work contributes to the broader knowledge space, and that it's helpful and adds value to this conversation. There was a question posed about, once the report is completed, how can we access it? Anything that's not classified is available publicly on our website, and anyone that we've spoken to, we make sure that we portray and characterize things accurately with them, so there is a conversation and back and forth about characterizing work accurately, and then we usually will try to give folks a heads up when we are finalizing our work.
I see a very interesting comment from Jan. Melanie, can you address Jan Bernstein's comment in the chat that starts diminishing transparency examples?
Well, I can certainly read her statement.
If you have the time to read through the Jan.
I can summarize it to say that the commenter is expressing some concerns about notice templates and the information available on the National NAGPRA program database pages, as well as the cost of mailings. Well, thank you, Michelle and Tammy and your team. And we will be sure to provide the transcript as well as the chat feed for you if you want to follow up on any of these comments that you've received. And again, for anyone in the audience, the contact information for the GAO team is in the meeting materials, and you are welcome to connect with them directly if you would like to provide them with additional input.
Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all.
Take care.
Take care.
Right. Mr. Chair, would you like to proceed to the next agenda item?
Yes.
Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is a report from the National NAGPRA program. Just a moment, let me reorganize my screens so I can make sure I have everything. Here we go. Okay. So as the manager of the National NAGPRA program, I will be providing this report to the committee on our activities. As you are all well aware, NAGPRA recognizes the rights of lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and Native Hawaiian organizations in Native American human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony. To realize those rights, NAGPRA requires museums and federal agencies to take certain actions for Native American human remains and cultural items in holdings or collections or removed from federal or tribal lands. There are a variety of administrative responsibilities that come along with these requirements, and those have been assigned to the Secretary of the Interior. The Secretary of the Interior has delegated certain of those tasks to the National NAGPRA program. My report to you today will focus on some of those administrative tasks that we are responsible for. This is a brief update on our work since I last reported to you in September. My report today will focus on our activities during the last 8 months, from October 1st to today. I ran these numbers this morning. The program reported on its activities during the previous fiscal year in our annual program report, which is available on our webpage. The National NAGPRA program organizes its work as well as its annual reports around the different sections of the Act. And my report today will focus on our work in the sections that the review committee is responsible for: inventories, summaries, and repatriation, or what has been retitled in the revised regulations as Subpart C, repatriation by museums and federal agencies. I do want to note that all of the data that I'm reporting today is publicly available and is updated in real time. So as we do our work here at the National NAGPRA program, that work is reflected on our public databases. There should not be any kind of delay between the public database data and the work that we are conducting. So all of that information and everything I'm going to share with you today is publicly available at nps.gov/NAGPRA. Anyone can use our databases to generate reports and get the same data at any time. So looking at the data, I'll try not to give you too many numbers because I know that can be challenging, but I do want to give you a few highlights. Right now, as of this morning, there are a total of 82,000 Native American human remains that have been reported in inventories by museums and federal agencies, but are still pending consultation or public notice prior to repatriation. This represents about 37% of the total number of human remains that have been reported under NAGPRA. That's a good number. 37% left for consultation and notification is a real improvement over just a few years ago, where that was well over 50%. So we're seeing that number get smaller. For cultural items, it's a little bit of the opposite. This year alone, we have seen over 125,000 cultural items be published in notices since October. That's a large number. It accounts for almost 20% of the total since 1990. So there's been, this all indicates significant activity in NAGPRA when it comes to inventories and summaries over the last 8 months. Mariah Soriano is the National NAGPRA Program Coordinator for Compliance, and much of her work relates to these inventories and summaries. During this fiscal year, she has been working to update and correct a lot of our data, including conducting audits of older data to ensure that these numbers and this information is as accurate as possible. We continue to receive record-breaking numbers of Federal Register notices. Since October 1st, we have received 585 notices for publication. Notice submissions average around 20 per week. We have published a total of 521 notices since October 1st. This includes 159 notices of intended repatriation, or NIRs, for Native American cultural items, and 295 notices of inventory completion for Native American human remains and associated funerary objects. In addition, we have published 4 notices that are a new type of notice, a notice of proposed transfer or reinterment, or NOT for short. Under the revised regulations, when no lineal descendant and no cultural affiliation can be identified for human remains, a museum or federal agency may, at its discretion, agree to transfer or reinter, but it must first publish an NOT. And so, as I said, we've published 4 NOTs since October. The remaining number of notices are notices of intended disposition from federal lands under Subpart B. Lori Jennings is the National NAGPRA Program Documents Coordinator, and she continues to manage this growing volume of incoming notices and ensure that everything makes its way from submission to publication. The revised regulations now require a repatriation statement after publication of a notice in the Federal Register. We have completed data entry on those statements that we have received, and we continue to receive them almost on a daily basis. We have updated the public database for the Federal Register notices to include the statement date. So when we receive a repatriation statement, we enter the date of that statement into the database, and it immediately shows up on our public-facing Federal Register notice page. Altogether, we have received 647 repatriation statements. While most of these were sent after the revised regulations went into effect in January of 24, we also have received some statements for notices prior to the revised regulations. And any museum or federal agency may send us a repatriation statement that covers any notice, and we will add it to our data. But the requirement only started in January of 24. Finally, we've received a new document type under the revised regulations, museum statements of holdings or collections that are required under 10.8 paragraphs C and D. We continue to receive and record museum statements as well as the responses to museum statements. While the initial data entry has been completed, we are still waiting on a database module to be built to fully capture the data so that I can report to you our numbers. Eventually, we hope to be able to add this to our public-facing database as well. But I hope within the next few months, and certainly by the end of this fiscal year, I'll be able to have firm, concrete numbers on museum statements as well as federal agency responses. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the newest members of the NAGPRA team, the National NAGPRA Program Fellows. They completed the bulk of this work on repatriation statements and museum statements, which was very tedious data entry. Without their dedicated efforts, we would not have been able to complete this data entry. We just don't have the staff. Audrey Andrews, Tanner Barney, and Shayla Charlie have joined the National NAGPRA program for a 2-year fellowship, and they'll be with us into the fall of next year. And while they have moved on to some more exciting tasks than just data entry, they continue to keep assisting us by entering new statements, whether repatriation or museum statements. This has been an enormous task, and frankly, one that we were not prepared for. And I am truly indebted to each of these fellows for their assistance in this enormous work. Beginning in January 2024, the National NAGPRA program started hosting a series of monthly webinars We've continued those webinars this year on the third Friday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern. Attendance at those sessions continues to be robust, topping out around 500 attendees at some sessions. During each webinar, we provide specific information on the NAGPRA regulations, but also allow time for questions. Recordings of all of our webinars are available on our events page. We continue to receive a large volume of phone calls and emails requesting assistance with NAGPRA. Thankfully, we have also added to our team Kate Compton-Gore, who joined the program as a training coordinator for 3 years. She presented her first webinar last month and will present the webinar this month on June 20th. In addition, Kate has been assisting with responding to all of the requests for repatriation or requests for assistance and creating resources as well as new templates for museums and federal agencies, as well as for Indian tribes and NHOs. I'd like to also take this opportunity to recognize David Tarler, who retired from federal service at the end of May. David worked for the National Park Service for over 30 years, the last 20 of which was with the National NAGPRA program. David was a valued member of our team and of the wider NAGPRA community. He will be missed by all of us, but we wish him the best in his retirement adventure. This concludes my report on the inventory, summary, and repatriation sections of the Act. However, I would like to provide an update on a few other areas that the review committee had requested. In 2025, Congress appropriated $3.4 million in grant funds for NAGPRA. The grant program supports 2 types of grants: project grants, which this year were increased to a maximum of $150,000 for consultation and documentation projects, and repatriation grants of up to $25,000 for direct repatriation expenses. Consultation and documentation grant proposals were due at the end of March. Repatriation grant proposals were due on May 9th. We hope to announce both sets of grants awards later this summer, probably in 2 different groups. Repatriation will likely be first. As a reminder to the audience, there are still funds available for repatriation grants until next May 2026. So there is an open funding opportunity for repatriation grants until next May, or until those funds are extended. We hope that museums and tribes will continue to apply for repatriation grants as needed throughout the next year. Angie Pearson continues to serve as our grants management specialist, although she has taken on additional responsibilities within NPS's grants management division. We appreciate Angie's continued support of the program despite taking on those additional duties. The chair of the committee requested that I provide specific updates on pending civil penalty investigations, and unfortunately, I'm unable to do so at this time. We do not provide information on investigations or civil penalties outside of what we report on our annual report. Any information that can be reported at the end of the fiscal year about civil penalties and investigations will appear in that annual report. The chair of the committee also asked that I provide a report on the staffing and funding of the National NAGPRA program. As I have indicated throughout this report, the staff of the National NAGPRA program are a small but mighty team, and unfortunately has grown this fiscal year. The fellows and Kate, as we like to refer to them, are our newest team members, have been an invaluable addition to our team. And while David's retirement has left a sizable gap in our team, I'm sure that we will continue to be as responsive and supportive to anyone who needs our assistance. In October, Angie Pearson, our grants management specialist, was moved from the program into a new grants division, although she retained responsibilities for NAGPRA grants. Shortly after that, Angie was actually promoted into another position within that grants division. But as I mentioned, she continues to serve as the NAGPRA grants manager. And again, we appreciate her double duty in that capacity. There have been no other changes in our staffing, and I'm not aware of any other changes to the program or the program staff. For the remainder of this fiscal year, so through the end of September, I do not anticipate any changes to our staff. As for the next fiscal year, I do not have any additional information beyond what is publicly available about the proposed federal budgets for fiscal year 26. The appropriations process for the federal government is underway, and any news source is your best source for that information. Once again, I'd like to commend the staff of the National NAGPRA program and the broader Department of the Interior for their collective efforts, which have allowed the program to uphold all of these responsibilities. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has about the work of the National NAGPRA program.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Melanie? So I do, obviously, because since I sent those concerns, and I have to say I'm really, really worried, and now even more so, given your comments on the status of investigations. We have one case in Hawaii where a museum who hadn't complied in 35 years was actively repatriating, consulting a Native Hawaiian organization, and then midstream repatriated the remains to an organization from another island because they couldn't tell that that organization wasn't from the island where the EV originated, and now refuse to undo their decision even though they're dealing with the wrong folks. We just want to make sure that, one, museums who don't comply after 35 years don't just get a simple free pass from failure to comply. Two, that we carefully look into reasons why when the museum says, well, we didn't know we had remains because they're in fragmented form, we didn't know they're Native Hawaiian. But they are in Hawaii, and they're not in a marked known cemetery. I mean, there's factors that have to be considered, and you cannot just pretend like, woe is me, I found human remains, I can't tell if they're Native Hawaiian. So that's a very serious concern, because those are being repatriated to a group from another island, and it's starting to create like very heavy duty friction between those two islands. Number two, there is a person who chooses to remain anonymous that submitted a complaint to National NAGPRA for 3,000 violations of NAGPRA by the State of Hawaii State Historic Preservation Division, mainly focusing on consultation and failure to publish notices in the Federal Register. And it's tough to know whether any of this is actually being looked at, or these guys are just getting a free pass, or what's happening, because it has to, we have the opportunity now to inform the Department of the Attorney General in Hawaii and the Department of Land and Natural Resources in Hawaii that NAGPRA is in addition to the requirements of Hawaii Rights Statutes Chapter 60, and that SHPD should be consulting and complying with NAGPRA as additional requirements to what the state law requires. And yet we have no sense, based on your answer, no idea, no clue, no anything about whether either of these issues are even being undertaken, or even have the attention of federal investigators. I know I filled out forms and I never got responses. I mean, what do we do?
Well, I'm sorry if you didn't get a response. We do respond to every allegation that we receive. And under the new regulations, within 90 days of receiving an allegation, we then respond with an investigation status. And that's at the point at which we begin an investigation or not. And so there should be at least 2 communications from our office after submission of an allegation. So that's the first point.
Can I
Again,
just address that real quick, Melanie, if I could just before you go into the next one. In the first case that I spoke of, that did happen, that I submitted, there was an initial response. The response was no, but you're allowed to provide additional information. I did, and then no response to that one. So that's the one I'm concerned about, the second response.
well, certainly, anyone who makes an allegation, whether an initial allegation or provides additional information, should receive a response from our office that we have received the allegation or the additional information. So I will check on that
Please.
for you. But again, there should be at least 2 points of contact from our office regarding any allegation that is submitted. If you do not receive a response from our office, it's likely we didn't receive the allegation, and that may be the issue. Again, all communication to the National NAGPRA program should come through our general inbox. It's NAGPRA_info@nps.gov. It's actually in the regulations, that email address, because we wanted to ensure that regardless of any staffing changes, there is a universal email address that can be used to reach the National NAGPRA program.
I had a couple more comments. Unless, I'm sorry, members, I'll need to hog, in Hawaii we say hog cheese the meeting. Does anyone else want to say or raise concerns before I go on? Okay. So Melanie, just to close out what we were saying, the Kauai Community College case, I did fill out those forms and did not receive a response. So if you could follow up specifically with that one. And then the Bishop Museum case, well, that was publicly submitted. So I'm not sure what else that person needs to do. Or are you saying that because there's some glitch in the submission process and it needs to be resubmitted?
Maybe if you could just follow up with me with the specific allegations, and then I can look into them for you.
Changing gears to grants, have fiscal year 24 grant funds continued to be dispersed since January 20th of 2025, given all the madness and I forget the guy's name, orange hair, he kind of crazy, that guy.
You're asking if grant funds have been released?
Continued to be dispersed since January 20th, 2025.
Yes, I'm not aware of any issue with grantees receiving disbursement of previously awarded grants.
We applied.
Oh, so new applications.
Okay.
We are working right now on making those awards.
But the existing ones prior to that continued to be dispersed, continued beyond January 20th, 2025, right?
Yes, so right, so we had some funding that we reserved for additional repatriation grants, and we're working on awarding those funds now.
Okay, bear with me. Another question. What effect would the administration's proposal to reduce the NPS national, this is the White House budget information. What effect would the administration's proposal to reduce the NPS national recreation and preservation staff from 194 to 32 have on the National NAGPRA program? Oh my God.
I can't answer that question.
Because the numbers are too broad, or the scope of it is too broad?
I have no information about how that budget proposal would be implemented.
Will this impact our ability to hold in-person meetings?
Again, I can't answer that question.
Okay, are we going to hold in-person meetings?
So right now we have a very clear travel restriction that includes special government employees and advisory committees. So we are unable to schedule in-person meetings at this time.
But I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? Who does it apply to?
So this applies to all federal advisory committees, as well as all federal employees within the National Park Service. There is a travel restriction. Travel is only allowed when it's related to health and safety or fire.
Don't they have a new jet? Like beautiful, could fly us all. Okay, I didn't realize it applied to the committee members as well. I thought it was just the feds who couldn't fly.
No,
We could keep you in from Harvard or from Penn or wherever we were going to be at, but it applies to the committees. Okay, got it. Wow. We are in tough times. Well, tough is putting it mildly. One of the questions that the GEO folks had posed was, were there any practices that we were aware of that could help, I think, facilitate the implementation of the collections process? Is there anything that comes to mind, Melanie, that in your experience that because we get a lot of inquiries ourselves from other organizations, some tribes, just what advice to give people in this day and age, given what's happening in DC and the cutbacks.
Well, I think that my answer to this question has always been the same. And that is that consultation early and often is the best way to succeed at NAGPRA. And thankfully, with platforms like Zoom or Teams or even old school telephones, consultation can occur with very little funds available.
Okay, members, that was all my questions. Any other questions?
I had one question.
Go ahead.
Melanie, you mentioned the museum statements publication, and I was taking notes while you were talking, but did you mention how many numbers of museum statements have been published since October?
Yeah, no, I don't have the numbers yet, and that's because I'll explain it since you asked. We've been recording every statement and response in our current tracking system. We need to have our database pull those statements and responses together to be able to count statements. If I were to give you a number right now, it would be double or probably even more counting because we're just tracking the correspondence as it comes in at this point. We need to do a little bit of data manipulation to really get to the numbers of statements. But it's sizable. It's definitely a very large number of statements. I would say, estimated or somewhere around 1,000 statements, separate statements that we've received.
Thank you. I was trying to get a sense of how the impact of the new regulations regarding that and whether it was successful. So I appreciate that information.
Based on the calluses that have developed on our data entry fingers, it's been a substantial response. We've gotten a lot of those statements. Angela?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of my comments was that ability to travel and the inability to travel has a major impact on how well we're able to do our jobs, because we are not, it's not only the actual meeting, but the ability to speak to people in, in person that are all over the country. It's one of the ways that people network and actually conduct some of their consultation meetings, because we all know we're going to be in those spaces and we're not all available or allowed to travel widely as we would need to. So I think that in itself is very it hampers the process. I have another comment that's an aside. It doesn't really conform to any of the questions, but since the regulations have passed and there's additional media coverage, we have noticed a large upswing in private citizens repatriating things that they shouldn't have. So I consider that to be a positive, in the sense that we're getting things that would never have come back to us before that. Thank you.
I do have one additional comment. I know we're all very concerned about budget cuts, and we might be in a position that there's not much we can do to remedy it right now, but something we're already starting to see with the travel restrictions, specifically the Park Service, their ability to respond to inadvertent discoveries. So I don't know if it's something that tribes want to start keeping track of how that is becoming deficient or inadequate. But it's something that we're starting to see and we're very concerned with on how to keep up with that, and having the Park Service staff available to respond, or even their collection staff available to respond in those instances. Thank you.
One other thing, Melanie, so you're saying there's no updates on the correspondence between NPS and the Senate? Well, I remember Senator Schatz, our Hawaii senator, was sending letters to museums who weren't complying. So are you saying that we don't have any copies of those? NPS doesn't have any copies of those?
Yes, so you had asked me to inquire with the Senate about copies of those letters. I took your request to the Office of Congressional Affairs for the National Park Service, and I have no further information and no documentation about that request.
Was there any consultation with Senator Schatz's office?
I don't know.
Oh. Well, I could do that.
Again, the last agenda item is your report to Congress. If the committee wanted to make a request to Congress to provide you with those copies of those letters, that would be another avenue for the request.
Thank you. Any other questions for Melanie under this agenda item? Okay, having had none, I just wanted to say on behalf of the committee to thank Melanie and her team for all that they're doing under very tough circumstances. Just the amount of Federal Register notices that are being going forward, the level of repatriation that's occurring. Just thank you. Thank you for keeping it going. It's important what we do. Important for people that's been sitting in boxes for over a century. And I really appreciate that, given the difficulties with government administration that we never, and especially the National NAGPRA folks have never lost sight of what the goal is. So thank you so much. Next on the agenda is public comment.
Yes, I will again open up the chat, and you may put your name in the chat to request to make a public comment, or you may raise your hand if you wish to make a public comment. I will just add that every meeting of the review committee provides this time for public comment. It is a requirement of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. You can always make a request either at this meeting or at future meetings through the National NAGPRA program to provide your comments to the review committee. The review committee can also accept written comments in advance of its meetings. Again, this is your opportunity to share any thoughts you have with the committee, especially in order to help inform the committee's report to Congress, which is the next agenda item. If you'd like to share with the committee. Mr. Chair, I am not seeing any hands raised nor any comments in the chat.
May I say this before we go on to the next agenda? Can we take a 10-minute break?
Yes, of course. I will start a timer for a 10-minute break.
All right. Well,
Hey, my timer has ended. Welcome back, everyone. I think we might have lost Monica, but only briefly. I think she was having some connection issues, and I'm sure she'll rejoin us shortly. The next item on the agenda is the Review Committee's report to Congress for fiscal year 2025. I will turn that discussion over to the committee. You're on mute.
I was asking if Monica came back yet. I can't see.
We'll reach out to her and see if she's having issues.
Okay. I guess the first thing I wanted to, we had made comments earlier about when the GEO was presenting about the 4 recommendations that were contained in our 2024 report to Congress. I just wanted to reiterate it here. It's my recommendation to the committee that we continue to include those 4 recommendations in our fiscal year 2025 report. But I think before we need to do that, preliminarily, we need to also establish a subcommittee. Oh, there she is. We need to establish a subcommittee to work on the 2025 report to Congress. Monica, you're head of the subcommittee. We just voted while you were not listening.
No, the transcript does not show.
Oh, shucks. All in favor, say who wants to be on the subcommittee to work on the fiscal year 2025 report?
I'll be on the subcommittee.
Me?
I'm happy to help as well.
Nice. Mahalo, Monica. Then myself. And we're still allowed to have past members support, right? Like I always invite Tim, Armin, was Shelley? Is it Shelley? Shelley, just the ones I've known. I mean, I've worked with recently, just because of the prior reports we have done. So, Melanie, we're still allowed under FACA. We're allowed to have
Under FACA, you can include non-members in a subcommittee.
Okay,
Angela has her hand raised.
Angela. Oh, you gotta unmute.
Sorry, I'm on my iPad and it froze. I'm willing to help.
Oh, awesome. And then I'm gonna send invites out to Tim, to Shelby, and to Armin.
Just a reminder, if the subcommittee works on drafting a report, that's something you can do independently. If the subcommittee would like to have a meeting, you'll need to let me know so I can facilitate a meeting of the subcommittee.
Roger.
Ale aloha.
Yes.
It's Monica. I just sort of have a question about procedures regarding working on this. I believe there was a date by which we need to provide Melanie or the program team with what we hope to include in the report, but would it be helpful for each of the, are you going to give us like direction, or would you like to just schedule a separate meeting? How are you thinking of proceeding, I guess, would help me.
Yeah. Normally, when do we get we usually adopt it in the fall meeting, correct?
Yes, in the past, it has been a meeting in September.
September, yeah. So around September. And it's really compiling information over the course of the year of, the reportings that's gone on, what the committee considers to be, again, the four core issues that we want followed up with. And I suspect if the GEO comes out with anything prior to September, comes up with any findings, that we have access to that to determine whether to incorporate it into our report as well. Main thing is that we have the information that we need to so like with the correspondence with Schatz's office, Melanie's right. I could do that directly, right, through our subcommittee work. Melanie?
The subcommittee cannot approach Congress directly.
Isn't that in Russia? That's true. Just kidding.
If the committee wanted to make a request of Congress in its report, that was my suggestion, that your report request copies of their correspondence.
But to the extent that we're not approaching all of Congress, we're just asking one of them, and I'm a constituent of that person, would I still be precluded from?
As an individual, you're welcome to do what.
Okay, I'll do it that way. Shots.
I should say that any member of the committee is welcome to, or the subcommittee is welcome to do research and provide that research to the subcommittee for their drafting, or to the committee as a whole during these meetings.
All right. Also, members, I had earlier, I had a motion to have the National Park Service request a California auditor to provide data regarding costs incurred by UC institutions. I'm looking for a motion to provide, to support our ability to do that. To have NPS request the auditor. Again, we're trying to figure out costs, right? We're trying to give Congress information that it needs to better support NAGPRA implementation. And getting, the committee's work in the last 3 years was every museum witness before us, we asked them to provide an accurate statement of what it's costing them to comply, so that we get closer to an accurate number. So I'm looking for a motion to have NPS request the California auditor to provide data regarding costs incurred by UC institutions in the implementation of NAGPRA. Mike, you have to unmute, Mike.
A motion.
Moved by Mike. Is there a second?
Second.
Monique. Okay, further discussion? Having heard none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Say
Aye.
Aye.
okay. Thank you, committee. The second, it was I put an attachment, and this has to do with I can see why there's maybe problems with enforcement on the case I was discussing earlier, where in the middle of a consultation, the museum gives the remains to someone who wasn't a claimant, whom they solicited, and then gave it to them, and they're from a different island. Proposed language to consider for a regulatory amendment. And so I put in that proposed language for you guys to look at. And so I'm looking for a motion. Did everyone see it or have time to look at it? Is this something we can discuss, or do you guys need more time? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question. Yeah, I had a question about that. So is that something that we would put into our report to Congress, since it's a change in the actual NAGPRA law that would need to happen, or the regulations, or is that something that the committee can just move forward?
Well, we would include it in our report, but it's a proposed, anyone can propose changes to the NAGPRA regulations. I'm just saying this one would probably help the situation that we're experiencing here.
I'll motion, Chair.
If
Sorry.
I was just going to clarify that if you're looking to make changes to the regulations, that would be a recommendation to the Secretary of the Interior, who is responsible for those regulations. If you're looking to make a change to the law itself, that would be in your report to Congress.
This is to the regulation, so we can do that to the Secretary. But mention it in our report that we did that to Congress, right? And this is what the report is for. Does that make sense, Melanie? So we have a motion by Mike.
I'll second.
I'm sorry, I missed. Who's that? Was it you, Dominic?
It was.
Okay. Mike and Don. Discussion. And mainly it's just to clear up what I think is I mean, just something that the rule is good, but it just requires clarification on what happens when they shift gears like that. So that's where that is coming from. Having heard no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 That was everyone.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
I just had a question for Melanie. I didn't know if she responded or not, but so even though we're recommending that to the Secretary of Interior, I think the chair asked if we could still include it in the report. Is that feasible? The report to Congress, that it was an action taken?
Certainly, the report to Congress is your report to Congress, and you can include whatever information you want to. I was just clarifying who has the responsibility for changes to the regulations.
Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. I'm looking at the communication I sent to you guys. Oh, yes. Do we all have our calendars, and can we work with Melanie on identifying the next available date for us for our next meeting?
The one that's before September 30th?
I don't know. Well, that's the question to Melanie. Will we be able to have one before September, or is September the
I would strongly recommend the committee meet again to finalize its report before September 30th.
Excellent. Okay. Good. I didn't know if we were, with the change in government rules. Okay, anyone, how do you guys want to do this? Do we want to just email available dates? Melanie, what works on, or maybe Lisa, what works on?
So, yeah, so we're happy to take care of that and send out an email and request dates that don't work as we've done in the past.
Yes.
Lisa can track that on a very complicated spreadsheet, so we identify the date that is convenient to everyone.
Yeah, and especially Toby. And do we have, of course, you can't answer this question, but I just want to put on the record that we are awaiting the appointment by the secretary of the 7th member so that the committee is full-bodied and we can do our work just that much more effectively. I have nothing else on this agenda item. I'm going to report to Congress. Any other members have issues or concerns with regard to the report to Congress 2025?
Sure. I think the committee would greatly benefit from additional public comment if the public is willing to make additional comment, especially about any new barriers that they may be encountering, with regards to staffing issues and funding.
I just saw a thumb go flying by. What was that? Oh, excellent comment. I support that.
I have reopened the chat. If there is anyone who wishes to make a comment, you're welcome to do so. You can also raise your hand.
I have a question for everyone in general. How have you been dealing with the entities that have no previous experience with NAGPRA? Has that been a huge hurdle for everyone? Does anybody have comments on that?
I do. I would say pleasantly surprised how well they knew the process. And they responded with, our staff took the training. So the discussions, even though, we're not happy that they're coming in late, we are happy that they know what to do and that the consultations have moved fairly quickly. If you put out educational opportunities to trainings like Melanie's doing and her staff is doing, that's the benefit. You're going to have a more informed, museum community initiating these consultations. So, it's working. I can say I haven't had any where they had no idea. None of that. Not like the 90s.
We have had a couple that still seem to be stuck in the 90s, where they have pretty much refused to work with us, and that collection that they're holding is a BIA collection. And so I think there are 2 or 3 from that particular state who have that same kind of mindset, and they're very small museums. They're not the ones that attend conferences that we regularly go to, or that we have had any other contact with besides these, individual cases. That had been an issue for us for quite a while. But another issue that we have seen is that the very small museums are expecting us to do a majority of the work on the collection.
I think in our consultations, the folks stuck in the 90s in terms of the rules is us. Because we're so used to for years following this process that you got to be reminded that no, you got to go look up and see what it says now. And so I've had times where I would be saying something and the museum person would go, those were updated in the recent regs. So I'm not afraid to admit, you got to go back and you got to consult the rules, because what you thought was the old way is new and improved. Okay, any more comments?
I had one. I was going to respond to Angela asking about the burden on tribes, and I had wondered about actually. I think one of the comments kind of alluded to that during the GAO's presentation about how much of a burden museums and federal agencies are putting to make the decisions and moving forward. And so I'm interested to see that in the report, and maybe there'll be some interesting practices on how to alleviate some of that. That's not just through funding, but through collaboration and working together. So that's just something I have been thinking about in lightening the load for everyone to make the process move more smoothly and move faster.
We had a hand raised. If you'd still like to provide a comment, I can allow you to talk if you'd raise your hand again. Or maybe you raised your hand by accident. If you'd like to provide a comment, you're welcome to raise your hand. You can also put your name in the chat and I can allow you to speak. Okay, maybe it was an accidental hand raise. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I tested it. I'm sure that it does work to raise your hand. It just takes me a minute to be able to allow you to talk. So if you do want to comment, we can facilitate that. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised or any comments in the chat. Mr. Chair, how would you like to proceed?
if someone wants to offer a closing prayer, that would be great. And if not, I would be more than happy to. Awesome, Dominique. Yeah.
Before you do that, would you like me to stop the recording?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, members. Thank you.